The lecture hall on Vultrex hummed with the low murmurs of its alien attendees, a mix of towering Vexian scholars, insectoid anchories, and spindly Murnagians who floated effortlessly in the low gravity. Bright holoscreens displayed intricate diagrams of various alien anatomy, each one accompanied by complex notes scrawled in several languages. The room, expansive and suffused with a dull green glow, exuded a scholarly ambience. At the podium stood Professor Vrieg, a renowned Vexian biologist known throughout the galaxy for his extensive knowledge of physiology across species. His serpentine form was coiled behind the lectern, while his 6 eyes scanned the audience with barely contained disdain. His skin, pale with bioluminescent patterns, shimmered as he gestured dramatically toward the holoscreens. And now Vrieg's voice resonated through the hall. We come to the final species in today's lecture, the humans. At that, the entire room shifted. An audible chuckle escaped a Murnagian scholar floating near the ceiling, and several Vexians whispered amongst themselves. Humans were infamous in the academic circles of Vultrex, but not for their intellect. Despite their stubborn tenacity, they were considered biologically primitive, delicate creatures of flesh and bone, compared to the near-invulnerable physiology of other species present. Vrieg activated a new holoscreen displaying a human skeletal structure, alongside a graphic of their cardiovascular system. The image seemed childishly simple in comparison to the previous slides of intricate multi-lobed hearts and redundant neural pathways seen in other species. As you can see, Vrieg drawled, humans possess but a single heart, reliant on a fragile system of vessels to transport their blood. One well-placed injury to this so-called heart, and they cease to function. Remarkable only in its simplicity, truly. Their survival in the galaxy is one of biology's greatest paradoxes. The room erupted in laughter. Vrieg indulged it for a moment before waving his hand to silence the crowd. Their musculature is equally inefficient. Rather than the reinforced, segmented structures seen in Vexians or the regenerative capabilities of the Ankyras, human muscles are prone to tearing under stress and require excessive recovery times. And their immune system, if you can call it that. He scoffed, a mere gamble of antibodies and adaptive cells, leaving them vulnerable to countless pathogens. It's astounding they've managed to persist this long. In the back of the lecture hall, a single figure sat quietly, observing the presentation without a word. Dr. Marcus Kessler, one of the few human researchers at Vultrex, watched as his species was dissected, both literally and figuratively, by alien scholars who considered themselves far superior. His short brown hair was neatly combed, and his sharp eyes never left Vrieg's sneering face. "Do you have anything to add?" Dr. Kessler. Vrieg's voice cut through the room, dripping with condescension. The question wasn't a genuine invitation for insight, it was a challenge. Marcus stood, straightening his black jumpsuit. He had endured this sort of ridicule before. It came with being a human on a planet where biological complexity was revered above all else. "I appreciate your thorough analysis, Professor," he said, his voice steady. "But you've overlooked one crucial detail." Vrieg's 6 eyes blinked in sync, a rare gesture of genuine curiosity. "Oh, and what might that be?" Marcus's lips curved into a slight smile. "Our adaptability." The room fell into an amused silence. A Vexian scholar whispered something that elicited a snicker from nearby colleagues, but Marcus continued. "We may lack redundant organs or segmented muscles, and yes, our immune system is less sophisticated than many species here, but it is our capacity to endure, to survive the impossible, that has allowed us to persist. Human biology is built on resilience. When pushed to the brink, we adapt, sometimes in ways science can't fully explain." Vrieg let out a sharp hiss, his equivalent of laughter. "Adapt. Dr. Kessler, adaptation is not unique to humans. Every species adapts to its environment. What makes your people any different?" Marcus tilted his head, his smile fading. "Perhaps it's time we put that to the test." Vrieg's eyes gleamed with interest, and a predatory smile curled across his face. "A wager, then? What do you propose, Doctor?" "An experiment," Marcus replied calmly. I'll subject myself to a series of controlled, extreme conditions that would, as you say, be impossible for a human to survive. If I endure, then perhaps you'll rethink your dismissal of our biology." The audience murmured again, but this time the tone was more serious. The laughter had died away, replaced by a palpable tension. Marcus's reputation on Vultrex was as much for his stubbornness as his intellect, and now he was wagering his life to prove a point. Vrieg grinned, showing his sharp, translucent teeth. "Very well, Dr. Kessler. We shall see just how far your vaunted adaptability truly goes." The first stage of the experiment began the next day in the university's testing chambers, an isolated, sterile environment equipped with the most advanced life support systems in the galaxy. Marcus stood in the center of the chamber, wearing only a thin bodysuit, his pulse steady despite the high-stakes gamble. Vrieg and several other scholars observed from behind reinforced glass, their expressions unreadable. A complex array of machinery hummed to life, and the chamber's environmental controls flickered as the first condition was initiated: sub-zero temperatures. The temperature plummeted rapidly, the air frosting over as it dipped well below what any human could reasonably endure. Frost began to form on Marcus's skin, his breath coming out in visible puffs. He hugged his arms around himself but remained standing. Vrieg watched intently, confident this would be the end of him. Human biology, with its need for consistent body temperature, would falter. And yet, to his surprise, Kessler did not collapse. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity. Marcus's skin turned blue, his body shivering violently, but he remained conscious, his teeth clenched. Vrieg tapped a clawed finger on the observation glass, puzzled. "I must admit, he's lasted longer than expected," one of the Murnagians whispered. Vrieg's eyes narrowed. "Increase the intensity." The temperature dropped even further, now venturing into territory that would instantly kill most life forms. Marcus's body shuddered, ice crystals forming in his hair, but he stayed upright. His lips moved, murmuring something inaudible to the observers. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Vrieg signaled the end of the test. The temperature returned to normal, and Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Medics rushed in, quickly wrapping him in thermal blankets and injecting him with stimulants to stabilize him. Vrieg approached the observation window as they worked on him, his expression unreadable. "Curious," he murmured to himself. The second stage was even more intense. Over the next few days, Marcus was subjected to immense gravitational forces. The chamber's artificial gravity was gradually increased far beyond what any human could withstand. Vrieg stood at the control panel, adjusting the settings with a clinical detachment. Inside the chamber, Marcus gritted his teeth, the crushing weight forcing him to his hands and knees. His bones ached and his muscles screamed under the pressure. The Vexian scholars took notes, nodding as they saw the expected signs of human frailty. But still, he endured. His body trembled, blood vessels popping under the strain, but he never called for it to stop. The observers watched in disbelief as he somehow managed to stay conscious, defying every assumption about his species' limitations. After the test was finally concluded, Marcus lay on the floor of the chamber, his breathing shallow but steady. Vrieg, for the first time in the course of these experiments, looked genuinely unsettled. "Your resilience is notable," he admitted, though his voice carried an edge of frustration. Marcus, still catching his breath, managed a weak smile. "Told you. We adapt." The third and final stage was to be the most dangerous yet. Marcus would be exposed to a concentrated pathogen, a virus engineered by Vexian biologists specifically to target human physiology. It was designed to shut down the nervous system and rapidly destroy cellular structures, resulting in a painful and swift death. There was no cure, no treatment at least, not for humans. Vrieg made no effort to hide his skepticism when Marcus agreed to the trial. Even the other scholars seemed hesitant, quietly questioning whether this experiment had gone too far. But Marcus was resolute. The pathogen was introduced into his system via a controlled injection. He sat in the center of the observation chamber, his pulse being monitored in real time as the virus began to take hold. The first symptoms appeared within minutes: tremors, a rapid pulse, and sweating. His nervous system was under attack. Vrieg watched from behind the glass, his expression more intense than before. Marcus's body convulsed, and he fell to the ground, his limbs seizing uncontrollably. "Prepare the medical team," one of the assistants urged. Vrieg hesitated. "No, wait." Marcus's convulsions slowed, and then, impossibly, they stopped. He lay on the ground, breathing heavily but alive. The monitors showed his vital signs stabilizing. Marcus lay still, breathing in ragged gasps, his chest heaving from the exertion. For several moments the chamber was deathly quiet. Vrieg's eyes, all 6 of them, were fixed on the human, as if trying to decipher some hidden code. Behind him, the other scholars whispered in disbelief, their earlier mockery replaced by a strange mixture of awe and suspicion. How one of the Mernaghian scholars floated closer to Vrieg, her voice trailing off, but the question hung in the air. How had Marcus survived? Vrieg ignored her and stalked over to the control panel. His claws tapped furiously across the sleek interface, pulling up the vital signs and real-time data streaming from Marcus's body. The virus should have shut down his nervous system entirely. He should be dead. Yet here he was, his vitals stabilizing, albeit slowly. Marcus, still lying on the floor of the chamber, coughed weakly, his voice hoarse but steady enough to speak. "I warned you," Marcus rasped, a hint of a grin playing at the corner of his lips. "We adapt." Vrieg's face tightened. He wasn't used to being wrong, especially not about something so elementary. Human biology was supposed to be predictable, fragile, primitive. Yet time and again, Kessler had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible for his species. The professor felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in decades: doubt. "This isn't adaptation," Vrieg muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "This defies explanation." The medics rushed into the chamber, gently lifting Marcus onto a stretcher. His body was weak, drenched in sweat, but his eyes were still sharp, still focused. As they wheeled him out of the chamber for further examination, Vrieg turned away, the tension in the room palpable. 2 days later, Vrieg stood in the sterile medical bay, staring at the data collected from Marcus's tests. The screens flickered with complex readings: his blood work, neural activity, cellular regeneration patterns. Everything suggested that Marcus had undergone a physiological response beyond the normal boundaries of human biology. It didn't make sense. The virus should have overwhelmed his system, shut down his motor functions, and yet Marcus had fought it off. No, not just fought it off. He had somehow survived in a way that Vrieg couldn't fully comprehend. "He's stable now," one of the medical assistants, a tall, wiry Ankari, said as she approached. "No lingering symptoms from the virus. His body fought it off completely." "How is that possible?" Vrieg asked, his voice tight. "His immune response accelerated to an unprecedented degree," she explained, glancing at her notes. "It's like his body identified the virus faster than we thought possible and developed countermeasures on the fly. But it's more than just that." Vrieg's voice was barely a whisper. The assistant hesitated, clearly unsure how to explain the next part. "There are unusual signs of cellular activity in his body, rapid regeneration in areas that shouldn't be able to recover from such intense damage. It's almost as if his body not only adapted but repaired itself as it went." Vrieg's mind raced. This wasn't natural. This wasn't something humans were supposed to be capable of. His theories, everything he thought he knew about human biology, were crumbling under the weight of Marcus's inexplicable survival. Marcus awoke in a quiet medical bay, the sterile hum of equipment surrounding him. He blinked, his vision blurry, his body still aching but alive. It was a strange feeling he should be dead. The virus had ravaged him, the gravity test had nearly crushed his bones, and the cold. He could still feel the phantom frost on his skin, but through it all, he'd survived. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Vrieg entered, his tall, serpentine form moving with an unusual stiffness. His pale, glowing eyes locked onto Marcus with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something Marcus hadn't seen in the professor before. Respect? No, not quite. Fear, perhaps. or fascination? "How are you feeling?" Dr. Kessler Vrieg asked, his voice flat but with a discernible edge of unease. Marcus sat up slowly, wincing as he stretched his stiff muscles, like I went 10 rounds with a grav hammer, but alive. "More than alive," Vrieg corrected, his voice lowering. "You've done something no human has ever done. Something I didn't think was possible." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what would that be?" Vrieg paced around the room, his long, coiled body trailing behind him. "You survived 3 tests that should have killed you. The cold should have shut down your organs. The gravity should have crushed your bones to powder. The virus should have killed me," Marcus finished for him. "Yeah, I know. I felt it trying to." The room was quiet for a moment as the weight of Vrieg's words settled in. Marcus had known the risks, of course. He had accepted the wager to prove a point, to show that humans were more than the fragile creatures the galaxy perceived them to be. But this was something else. Vrieg leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "What happened to you in there, Dr. Kessler? Your body's response to these tests, it's beyond the normal range of human adaptability. I can't explain it, can you?" Marcus stared back at the professor, his expression unreadable. "I don't think I can, Vrieg. Maybe we're more adaptable than even we know." Vrieg's eyes flashed, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "No, this isn't just about human resilience. There's something else, something unique to you." Marcus hesitated, then looked Vrieg dead in the eye. "Maybe it's not something you can quantify with your data, Professor." Vrieg stiffened, recoiling slightly from the implied challenge. Every biological response can be quantified. Every adaptation can be explained. "Maybe not this one," Marcus replied calmly. "Maybe this is something you don't understand yet." Vrieg opened his mouth to retort, but before he could speak, the door to the medical bay slid open again. A tall Vexian security officer entered, his face stern and his long arms crossed over his chest. His gaze darted between Vrieg and Marcus. "Professor Vrieg." "Dr. Kessler," the officer's voice boomed. "There's been a development." Both men turned toward the officer, their brief confrontation momentarily forgotten. "What is it?" Vrieg asked, his curiosity piqued. "We've detected an anomaly in the atmosphere. Something large, entering Vultrex's orbit," the officer replied, his voice tense. "A ship. Unidentified." Vrieg's eyes widened. "A ship? In Vultrex's orbit? That's impossible. Our airspace is restricted." "That's why we're concerned," the officer said grimly. "This ship is broadcasting no identification signal, no known language or communication codes." Vrieg exchanged a glance with Marcus, his earlier annoyance melting into something more serious. An unknown ship entering Vultrex's airspace wasn't just a breach of protocol, it was a potential threat. And if there was one thing Vrieg disliked more than having his theories questioned, it was being unprepared for an external threat. "I'll need to see this ship," Vrieg said sharply, his tone shifting into one of authority. Marcus swung his legs off the medical bed, pushing himself to stand despite his body's protests. "I'm coming with you." Vrieg frowned. "You should rest, Kessler. You're still recovering." Marcus shot him a hard look. "I'm fine. And if there's something going on, you'll need all the help you can get. I didn't come to Vultrex to sit on the sidelines." Vrieg hesitated for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. "Very well. But stay out of the way if things get dangerous." A wry grin touched Marcus's lips. "You underestimate me again, Professor." The 3 of them hurried out of the medical bay, the tension growing as they moved toward the observation deck. Marcus's mind raced as he followed Vrieg and the officer. What kind of ship could have breached Vultrex's strict security measures? And why now? When they reached the observation deck, the scale of the situation became immediately clear. Through the massive panoramic windows, they could see a colossal vessel looming in the atmosphere above the planet. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, black as void, angular, and bristling with strange antennae and structures that didn't conform to any known design. Alarms blared softly in the background, but no one in the control room spoke. They were all too busy staring at the ship in awe, their expressions a mixture of fear and wonder. Vrieg's 6 eyes blinked rapidly as he observed the vessel. That's not one of ours, nor any known allied species. What in the galaxy could it be? Before anyone could answer, a harsh buzzing filled the room, followed by a garbled, static-laden transmission from the ship. Attention. Vultrex. Human. The word human was distorted but unmistakable. Every head in the room turned toward Marcus. He felt his pulse quicken. Vrieg frowned, looking between Marcus and the screen. Why would they mention humans? What could they want with you? I have no idea, Marcus replied, though even as he spoke, a sinking feeling was forming in his gut. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. The experiments had only been the beginning, and now something far larger, far more dangerous was headed straight for him.